Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz this morning, again, 24 hours after opening it, and called America a pirate, not an aggressor, not an enemy, a pirate. That one word tells you everything about where the real power sits in this confrontation, and it is not where Washington thinks it is. Stay with me. Because what China quietly built over the last 10 years is the reason Iran can say that, and mean it. Welcome to War Room Economics. This channel gives you the structural truth that sits underneath the headlines. The architecture, the facts, the real reasons things happen the way they do. Not the official version, the honest one. If that is what you have been looking for, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. It costs you nothing, and it means you will not miss a single update as this story develops. Because it is developing fast. Now let us build the full picture together. Because once you understand what China spent 10 years quietly constructing around Iran, everything happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now becomes completely predictable. Here is what the last 24 hours looked like in the real world, rather than on the news ticker. Yesterday, Iran announced the Strait of Hormuz was fully open for commercial shipping. Trump posted on social media in capital letters, Iran has announced the strait is fully open. Thank you. Thank you. Stock markets surged. Oil prices dropped. Every major channel ran the same headline. Deal close, war ending, American pressure working, victory. That was yesterday. This morning, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that control of the strait has returned to its previous state. Ships arriving at the entrance to the Persian Gulf began turning around. 5 Greek and Indian tankers made their way toward the strait and reversed course before entering. One vessel stopped transmitting its location entirely, going completely dark on satellite tracking. And the IRGC used one specific word to describe the American naval blockade. They did not call it military action. They did not call it economic pressure. They called it piracy, maritime robbery. Those are their exact words. Now think about what that word tells you. A country that has been bombed for 50 days. A country whose supreme leader was killed on day 1 of this war. A country whose central bank has privately warned that economic recovery could take 12 years. That country looked at the most powerful navy in human history and called it a pirate operation. That level of confidence does not come from military strength alone. It comes from a structural foundation that somebody else spent a decade building underneath Iran. And that somebody is China. But before I show you exactly what China built and why it changes everything, tell me where you're watching from right now. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. I genuinely want to know because this story is hitting differently in London than it is in Washington than it is in the Gulf. Write it below. I read every single one. To understand why the situation has developed exactly the way it has, you need to ask one question. Not what each side says it wants. What each side actually wants. Because in every major geopolitical confrontation, those two things are almost always completely different. America says it wants the strait open a nuclear deal and the war to end. What America actually wants is something deeper. America needs to demonstrate that its military and economic power still forces submission from regional states. It needs to prove this, not just to Iran, but to China, to Russia, to every government currently watching this war, decide whether American dominance still means what it used to mean. Iran says it wants the blockade lifted and its frozen assets returned. What Iran actually wants is something that no bomb and no blockade can take away. Iran wants to establish permanently that the Strait of Hormuz operates under Iranian sovereign authority, not just during this war, forever, as a permanent structural feature of the global energy system. Because if that becomes the established reality, Iran transforms itself from a sanctioned country into an indispensable strategic actor. And here's the problem. These two things are completely incompatible. America cannot demonstrate that its power forces submission while Iran is freely exercising sovereign authority over the strait. Iran cannot establish permanent sovereign authority while America's blockade declares it illegal. There is no comfortable middle ground. One of them wins this argument, or neither does, which is exactly why this has gone on for 50 days with no resolution, and exactly why Iran closed the strait again this morning without flinching. Now, here's the part that mainstream coverage is completely missing, and it is the part that makes everything else make sense. Stay with me. The question that nobody is properly answering this morning is a simple one. How does a country that has absorbed 50 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Gulf War close the world's most important waterway again with complete confidence and call America a pirate? The answer is what I want to call the decade of quiet. 10 years of patient, invisible, deliberate construction by China that gave Iran the economic foundation to absorb maximum American pressure without collapsing. It was built in 4 specific layers. The first layer is the payment system. China began purchasing Iranian oil in Chinese yuan, not American dollars, years before this war started. This matters enormously because American sanctions operate by cutting countries out of the dollar payment network. If you cannot receive dollars, you cannot pay for imports. You cannot fund your military. You cannot function in the modern economy. Iran should have been financially strangled. It was not, because China built a parallel payment system that bypasses the dollar entirely. Iranian oil revenue kept flowing through yuan channels that American financial enforcement simply cannot reach. The second layer is the shadow fleet. China's tanker network spent years perfecting invisible oil transport, ships that disable their GPS tracking systems and go completely dark on satellite monitoring, ships flying flags of random countries to disguise their origin, ship-to-ship transfers in international waters near Malaysia where Iranian crude gets relabeled as Malaysian oil before delivery to Chinese refineries. China's official customs records show zero imports from Iran since 2022. Yet China's recorded imports of Malaysian crude last year reached 1.3 million barrels per day, more than double Malaysia's entire oil production. The oil was Iranian. The paperwork said Malaysian. 1.3 million barrels every single day moving invisibly through a system America could see but could not stop. The third layer is the strategic reserve. China entered this war sitting on approximately 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil in storage, built by quietly purchasing Iranian and Russian sanctioned oil at heavily discounted prices over 2 years. When Hormuz closed and oil spiked above $120 per barrel, China did not panic. Its economy stayed stable. The International Energy Agency warned Europe had 6 weeks of jet fuel remaining. China had 4 months of supply cover in warehouses. The energy shock America designed to force Iran into submission bypassed China entirely. And the fourth layer is the one most people are not reporting. A Chinese satellite with resolution of 0.5 meter per pixel acquired by Iran in late 2024. 10 times sharper than Iran's own best satellite, monitoring American positions across the region in real time, feeding targeting data to Iranian strike systems, connected with Russian satellite intelligence, creating a zone around Iran where if you can be seen, you can be targeted. And America cannot destroy those satellites without starting a direct war with China. This is the decade of quiet. Payment systems, shadow fleet, strategic reserves, satellite networks. China never announced any of it. China never signed a public treaty with Iran. China simply built it, layer by layer, quietly. And this morning, Iran used every single layer of it. You are watching War Room Economics. If this structural analysis is giving you the honest picture you cannot find anywhere else, please give this video a like right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it directly helps this channel reach more people who deserve to hear this. Now let us keep going, because the next part is where this gets personal for every household in Britain and America. Now I want to be completely honest with you and present the strongest possible case for the American position. Because I never want you to simply accept what I say. I want you to test the argument against the best opposing case. Here is America's strongest argument. Iran is genuinely hurting. The Iranian rial lost 15% of its value in a single month. Iran's central bank privately warned recovery could take 12 years. Iran fired significantly fewer missiles in the final week of the war than the first. America turned back over 10 ships at the blockade. It expanded boarding authority across the entire Arabian Sea. It imposed new sanctions on Iranian shipping networks. It is actively rearming. The Pentagon confirmed America is reloading with more capability than it had at the start. And the number that matters most? America reportedly offered Iran $20 billion in frozen assets. Iran started demanding $27 billion. America started at $6 billion. The negotiating gap was narrowing. Movement was real. The argument that sustained pressure eventually produces results has genuine historical precedent. Libya in 2003. South Africa under sustained economic isolation. The pressure argument is not empty. It has worked before. Here's what it misses. The argument confuses pain with collapse. These are not the same thing. Pain means a country is suffering. Collapse means a country cannot function. The distance between those two things is exactly what the decade of quiet was designed to create. China's payment systems and shadow fleet and strategic reserves did not prevent Iran from feeling pain. Iran is in genuine pain, but they prevented collapse. Iran still has enough oil revenue flowing to keep making its own choices. Iran still has enough economic oxygen to decide when to open Hormuz and when to close it. That is the difference between a country being pressured and a country being forced. America spent 50 days trying to force Iran to a decision. Iran is still making its own decisions. The distance between those two things is China. And here is what this means for your energy bills and your household costs right now. Because this is war room economics. And the economics always come home eventually. Every time oil prices spike, ordinary families in Britain and America pay the price at the petrol station and the supermarket checkout. When Hormuz closed, oil went above $120 per barrel. Everything that moves by road, by sea, or by air got more expensive. Food, medicine, heating, electricity, everything. The economic pain of the Hormuz closure did not land on China. China had 4 months of supply cover in warehouses. It did not land primarily on Iran. Iran's survival infrastructure absorbed it. It landed on families in Manchester and Miami and Glasgow and Georgia who had no part in starting this confrontation and no ability to influence how it ends. And every day that this remains unresolved is another day those prices stay elevated, another day that heating bills stay higher than they should be, another day that the weekly food shop costs more than it did 2 years ago. The decade of quiet that China built did not just give Iran economic oxygen, it redirected the economic consequences of American pressure away from its intended target and onto the populations of America's own allies. That is not a side effect. That is architecture. So what happens next? Because this morning is not the end of the story. It is a signal, and I want to read that signal carefully. 3 possibilities, and one of them changes everything. There are 3 realistic possibilities from where we stand this morning. The first is that economic pressure finally crosses a threshold and Iran accepts a deal before the current ceasefire deadline. Under this scenario, Iran calculates that $20 billion in frozen assets plus relief from the blockade is worth accepting terms that look like concession, but actually preserve practical Iranian authority over Hormuz routing and coordination. Ships still follow Iranian designated routes. The IRGC remains present in the strait. Iran calls it managed navigation. America calls it freedom of navigation. Both are describing the same reality differently. This is possible. The diplomatic framework involving Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia is actively working toward this outcome right now. The second possibility is that talks collapse again and bombing resumes. And here is what makes the second round structurally different from the first. Iran used the ceasefire period to clear debris from its underground missile facilities. Satellite images showed heavy machinery operating around the clock at Iranian military sites during the pause in fighting. Half of Iran's missile launch capability remains intact underground. If bombing resumes, America may find the second phase significantly more expensive than the first. The third possibility, and this is the one China is actively working toward, is an extended ceasefire that gradually becomes a permanent reality without ever being formally called a peace deal. China has been in daily diplomatic contact with both sides throughout this war. China and Pakistan delivered a joint peace initiative. China's interest is not in either side winning decisively. China's interest is in a stable Hormuz, a surviving Iran, and a permanent historical record that shows the world's most important maritime waterway was resolved when China's foreign minister made a phone call, not when America imposed a blockade. Watch what China does not say in the next 72 hours, because in this story, silence is always the most important signal. Let me bring everything together, because this is what the last 24 hours actually proved. Iran closed Hormuz yesterday, opened it on its own terms, linked to conditions Iran chose, then closed it again this morning and called America a pirate. In 24 hours, Iran demonstrated everything that the decade of quiet was designed to produce. Not because Iran is militarily stronger than America. Iran is not stronger than America in any conventional sense, but because China spent 10 years making sure that American strength, however overwhelming, could not translate into the specific outcome America was trying to force. The yuan payment system kept Iranian oil revenue flowing outside the dollar. The Shadow Fleet moved 1.3 million barrels of Iranian oil every day, while official records showed 0. The 1.2 billion barrel strategic reserve absorbed the energy shock. The satellite network guided Iranian targeting while staying beyond American reach. And somewhere in Beijing, in a room full of people who spent a decade designing exactly this outcome, nobody this morning is surprised by any of it. The ceasefire deadline approaches. Talks have no confirmed date. Iran's parliament says the rules of Hormuz will be determined on the battlefield. Trump says Iran has agreed to everything. Iran says Trump's claims are false. Ships are turning around in the Persian Gulf. This is what happens when one side plays a 10-year strategic game and the other side responds day by day. I want to know what you think. Do you believe America fully understood what China had built before it launched this operation? Or is Washington only discovering it now? Write your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspective on this genuinely matters. Subscribe to War Room Economics if you are not already with us. Hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who deserves the honest picture rather than the victory headline. This is War Room Economics. Stay sharp, stay informed. We will see you in the next one. Next